everybody for coming out. Can you guys, is the sound working? Do I need to be on? We're recording this? I do. So thanks for coming out. This is slightly odd, obviously, because we didn't have quite the turnout we expected. That's okay, we'll make it work. I get the sense that some of you are here to study, am I right? Just keep going. Like, have one ear open if you're interested. So anyway, I appreciate the invitation. It's nice to be here. I have a huge heart for the city. And we are abandoning like a formal presentation more or less. But I want to kind of convert it into more of a dialogue just because there aren't very many of us. It may be better just to sort of have the conversation. But I'll tell you a little bit about my story and what's going on in St. Marcus and what some of the issues are here in the city. So I'm a native of Great Britain. I moved to the United States in 1990 to go to Northwestern University in Chicago. And I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do until the Soviet Union collapsed. That was back in 1989. And everybody said, if you're a student, you should study Russian because there's lots of jobs in Russia and good things to do. So I studied Russian language, literature, culture, and politics. Went to Russia summer of my senior year and absolutely hated it. Some of you may relate to this. I came back from my senior year at Northwestern and I could more or less speak Russian, and I vowed I would never go back. And I was sort of depressed because it was now my senior year and I didn't really know what to do with life. And God had a plan. So I was about Christmas time and I was involved in a Christian fellowship at Northwestern. And my one African-American friend, Northwestern at the time was not very diverse. We got into a furious argument about race relations in the United States. And she told me that I didn't understand what it was like to be black in America. And I kind of scoffed and said, well, what's there to know? Like, it can't be that complicated. And she challenged me to do an urban plunge. So I spent spring break of my senior year on the west side of Chicago in the Austin neighborhood. And God, trounced me. I was humbled and amazed and heartbroken and stunned by what the Austin neighborhood was like. And Chicago, a lot like Milwaukee, is incredibly diverse. So you can walk across the street and the city changes dramatically. So the Austin neighborhood, very, very poor, about 100% African American, few Hispanics. And I was absolutely stunned by the difference between Evanston and Austin, and they were 8 miles apart. And during that week, I got my life's calling, which was to live and work in the central city. And I didn't know how to do that, so when I graduated Northwestern, I signed up for the AmeriCorps program, which is a bit like the Peace Corps, but it's domestic. And they assigned me to Habitat for Humanity in West Humboldt Park. So I went and I did my year of service in West Humboldt Park and basically built homes, learned how to convert vacant multi-unit buildings into decent housing for low-income folks. And Habitat hired me, and I worked for them for 2 more years. And it was in my 3rd year at Habitat that I started to get to know the families that moved into our building. I was given the responsibility of managing a 40-unit building and got to know the families, and I realized that the kids weren't being educated. And I just couldn't quite fathom how it was that in the city of Chicago, kids could be 15 years old and really not know how to read. And at the time, Arnie Duncan and Paul Vallis were reconstituting the Chicago public schools. And I was listening to what they were doing in this big city dialogue about how to fix the Chicago public schools. And I felt like God was calling me into education. So I went to DePaul University and got my master's in secondary education. And then I conspired to student teach in the Chicago public school that was in my neighborhood. I really felt like the public schools is where I was supposed to be. So I student taught at the Joan F. Arai Middle School, which is a 600 student middle school on the north side of Chicago, predominantly minority, and failing miserably. And I thought, it was a block from my church and 2 blocks from where I lived, and I thought God was going to do this amazing thing where I was going to meet all these kids, and I'd take them to youth group, and they'd come to faith, and it would be amazing. And the truth was, I got absolutely destroyed that year. I was in a school that was out of control. It seemed like the whole system was set up to sort of guarantee student failure. And I became bitter, I became angry, I became discouraged. And I fought through to the end of the year. And then at the end of the year, I resigned. And I spent the first half of the summer, and actually in spring when I was still at Arai, trying to get a job doing relief work overseas. I was done with American poverty, and I thought if I just go to Zimbabwe or Zambia or Namibia, there'll be people there who need help, who will be open to the gospel, and I can witness. It'd be useful. And I couldn't get a job, and I couldn't figure out why it was so hard to get a job, like working for nothing in Namibia, but I couldn't. And early in the summer, my upstairs neighbor knocked on my door, and he said, "Hey, Henry, you're unemployed, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "Well, I need a social studies teacher for this summer, for a 6-week summer school program. You'll be teaching 30 freshmen a whole year of social studies." And so I was sort of desperate. I said, "Okay, fine, I'll do that." So I went to the Niles North High School, which is a really affluent high school right by Old Orchard Mall off I-94 in North Chicago. And I taught summer school. It's crazy because day one, I walk in and there's 30 kids. They're sort of white and South Asian, a lot of Indians, a lot of Pakistanis, some Jewish kids. And they're all silent. They're all looking at me like this. It was their first day of high school. Like they were terrified. Right? Well, so was I. I'd never taught high school before. But anyway, I taught the summer school program and I could teach. Like we had the equipment we needed. There was discipline. There was support. There was mentoring. There was parent participation. And it was amazing. And I loved it so much that when Niles offered me a job at the end of the summer school program, I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I was hired to teach US history to juniors at Niles North, which was hilarious. So I'd never studied US history. So I get the book and I just like read ahead of them and I change the parts I don't understand. So like, there's this whole big section on the American Revolution. I'm like, what is that? I've never heard of that. Oh, that's the War of American Rebellion. So I had a blast with these kids because I taught US history from a British perspective. And like in England, to be honest, US history is like a week. That's it. Because like there was India, and there was Australia, and there was South Africa, and there was all this stuff, and so I just didn't know. But it was awesome because the kids weren't all perfect, but it was a great school. So I taught there for 2 years, and about a year into it, I realized I was loving it, but I wasn't where my calling was. My calling was supposed to be in the central city. And I was Baptist. So I was British Baptist, living in Chicago, teaching in a public school. And while I was at Niles, I met a guy by the name of Cole Knipple. And I think we know Cole. He's a graduate of this school. And like many of the graduates of this school, frankly, something happens to a lot of people at this school, doubtless MSOE as well, and UWM, excuse me. But here, like transformative things happen where people like I've met a lot of movers and shakers who have come out of this place. Anyway, I meet Cole, and he's an administrator and I'm a teacher, and he has all of the Indian and Pakistani kids because he's the director of the English department and they're in ESL. And I know the Indian and Pakistani kids because I'm the cricket coach. Right? They've been longing to have a cricket coach. And I show up and I'm told right away, you're the cricket coach. In fact, I think that's the only reason they hired me. It wasn't to teach US history. But anyway, we met with these Indian and Pakistani kids and we realized we had some commonalities. We loved Jesus. We just were all in. We wanted to do ministry. Number two, we were committed to urban education. And neither of us could figure out why we're in the Niles Township. And number three, we loved beer. So we would go out after school and we'd go and we'd drink beer. And it was great. His old orchard was right there. Anyway, he left after I'd been at Niles for a year. And he got the call to be the principal at St. Marcus. And at the time, St. Marcus had 95 children. It was in a building that was over 100 years old. And it was like, frankly, Jesus was all over the building, but in every other way it was just a really sleepy central city school, nickel and diming to get by. And so it's November of my second year at Niles, and the phone rings, and it's Cole, and he says, "Henry, come to Milwaukee." I'm like, "What? Where's Milwaukee?" Okay, so I go up for the weekend and go to St. Marcus to worship, and he shows me the school. And he actually says to me, "You should come and be the assistant principal." Like Milwaukee, Lutherans, like, you know, non-Lutherans, when they hear Lutherans, you know what they think about? Like super liberal, like, whatever, I won't say anymore through the text, but right? So I'm like, Cole, absolutely not, that's ridiculous. So he calls again about a month later and he says, hey, you're off school and we have school, why don't you come up? And I'm like, all right. So I come up and I visit the school. And I'm actually really amazed that the gospel is being preached. I'd never been in a Christian school. And I could see Jesus everywhere on the walls, and the gospel was clearly taught to what St. Marcus did. But at the same time, it was a really sleepy school. My kids were literally sleeping in class. It was like this. So he says to me, I have this vision. We're going to build the best urban Christian school in America. And I want you to come up and be the assistant principal, because it's going to be awesome. And we talk about it, and I'm frankly skeptical. Like, raise your hand if you know what kids' schools are. Okay, just a few of us. It's called the Knowledge is Power program. The best urban educators in America. Started out with two guys down in Houston. They were student teaching. They were in a terrible school, but they had a trainer who was training them, a woman named Harriet Ball, who recently passed away, larger-than-life African-American woman, who was an awesome educator. And she took these two young guys under her wing, and she made them great educators. The three of them got together, and the next year they opened a charter school in Houston that they called the Knowledge is Power program. And it was amazing. So 2 years later, New York City asked them to open a school in New York City. So one of them stays in Houston, one of them goes to New York, and they open a school in Houston. It's so amazing, 60 Minutes does an episode. Well, that's not easy. Like, 60 Minutes doesn't just do episodes willy-nilly. But anyway, I listened to this episode, and it's about 4 black kids in the South Bronx outperforming the statewide average in reading and math, and this amazing school. And you know what my reaction is? Because I'm thinking back to my time at Joan FRI. You know what my reaction is when I watch this 60 Minutes? They're cheating. Like, it just, I was like, you can't do that. Like what they claim to do, you can't do. So anyway, Cole says, Henry, we're going to build the best urban Christian school in America based on 3 legs to the stool. Leg number 1, the power of the Christian gospel, right? The Christian gospel is the most powerful thing in the world, and if you insert it in a school, you'll have a great school, right? Makes sense. Then we're going to take the kid model, which basically says no excuses. Every child that walks in our doors must be successful. And then thirdly, vouchers. This is still a crazy thing. Milwaukee is the only city in the United States of America where an unlimited number of kids can attend a private Christian school for free. Like, has that occurred to us? How miraculous it is that vouchers exist? Like, other than the Second Amendment, the whole gun thing, the second thing that, like, the United States is crazy about, to our Europeans' eyes, is the separation of church and state. Like, this country is crazy about separation of church and state, and I get that. But why do we have vouchers? Well, it was this miraculous thing where this white governor, white Republican governor, and this African-American Democrat from Milwaukee got together and said, our poor black kids in the city are dying. They just don't have good schools to go to. Let's create a program for 1,000 kids. And you know, the people who hate vouchers and love the separation of church and state sued. But vouchers stayed alive in the state Supreme Court by a vote of 3-4. It was a 1-vote win. Then it was challenged all the way to the federal Supreme Court. You know what the win was? It was a 5-4 win. It was 1 vote. Okay? So, totally miraculous. So vouchers exist, and now we can educate as many kids as we want, frankly, at taxpayer expense in Christian schools. It's crazy. So, I come up the 3rd time to Milwaukee, and I've been praying about it, and I'm just like, all right, I'll become a Lutheran, I'll join St. Marcus, I'll go into private education, I'll join a school with 95 kids, I'll take $20,000 pay cut, or whatever it was big. Yeah, I'll do it. So I moved up to Milwaukee, and I'm here 2 weeks. And St. Marcus has a pastor, Pastor Mark Jeske, who's a big vision guy, and he said, okay, we have this vision and we have vouchers, let's start raising some money, let's build a new building. So they started a $5.5 million campaign to build a new building. So I roll up, I buy a house a block from the school old school building is being torn down, and we're renting a YMCA 12 blocks west. And I've been there like a week, and I'm just getting settled. Cole's like, okay, here's your ticket, you're off to New York.
So he sends me to the South Bronx, and for 5 days I watched the kids' school in the South Bronx. It's their summer school program. They are incorporating all of the 5th grade students who are new to the school, who have been randomly selected by lottery. And I'm scared to death, because I'm staying in the YMCA in the South Bronx. Don't stay in the YMCA in the South Bronx. That is a crazy YMCA. And I go to the school, and it was like one of those movies where somebody goes to heaven and there's all those bright lights and stuff, because I walk from the YMCA, get on the subway, go to the school, and the kids' school is on the 4th floor of a New York public school building, and it's all concrete. Everything everywhere is concrete in that part of the South Bronx. And I walk in the door, and the school is crazy. The school is totally out of control. And I go up the stairs, and I get to the 4th floor, and I open the doors. And that's when you had like the heavenly music. It was so bizarre. The kids' school on the 4th floor was night and day. Literally, the lights were brighter. Like they cleaned the lights. And there were posters everywhere. And these kids were in uniforms, and they were walking in dead straight lines. You went into the classrooms and the kids were actually like focused and learning. So I was completely amazed by what I was seeing. And on Wednesday, I was a little bit bored, so I went down to the lunchroom. And the cafeteria was about 5 times bigger than this room, and it was divided in half. And on one side was the kids from the first 3 floors, and on the other side were the kids from the top floor, from the kids' school. And it was crazy, because these kids were out of control. Like up out of their seats, throwing food, teachers are yelling, it was just like chaos. And on the other side, the kids are all seated in rows. There's a teacher at each table. They're having conversations. And when I walk down the side and I'm like listening to what they're talking about, these kids have napkins on their laps. So bizarre. Like really, in middle school, napkins on your laps? Yeah. Anyway, what I learned what Cole was talking about. This notion that if you run an exceptionally high quality school, even in communities that are extremely poor, with parents who are single parents and very low income, and you give kids a vision, kids will be highly successful. And this is what Kip was claiming, it's what Kip was proving, and now Kip runs 180 some schools nationwide. So I knew what I was doing. Meanwhile, Cole and the crew were pounding the sidewalks recruiting kids. That fall we opened with 220 kids at the YMCA. Cole turned the whole program upside down. He extended the school day. He added a Saturday school, put the kids in blazers and ties. And he implemented all of these crazy, like, disciplinary notions. Like here was one that he rolled out about a month in. If you tisk or eye roll, you get an in-school suspension. You guys know what I mean by tisk or eye roll? It's like when you correct a child, and they go like this. They roll the eye and they smack the lip, right? It was hilarious, because the kids did it all the time. When we discipline kids, we got an eye roll and a lip smack. So Cole gets in front of all the kids and he says, you know what, an eye roll and a lip smack is the same thing as giving the middle finger. We all know what that means, right? If you roll your eyes and do a lip smack to a teacher, it's like doing the middle finger. And if you do that, you're going to have a 1-day in-school suspension. That means you stand against a wall from 8 o'clock till lunchtime, then you eat lunch, then you have a big old writing packet, and when you've done with the writing packet, you can go back to class. So he tells the students, he sends a letter home, and the next day we in-school suspend about 30 kids. That's 1 out of 7. They were everywhere. We had racquetball courts because it was a YMCA. There were kids in the corners of the racquetball courts. Like wherever we could put kids. You know what happened? What do you think happened when we did that? There was 2 reactions. Parents went ballistic. Like, how dare you do that to my child? And kids stopped smacking their lips and eye rolling. And what Cole did was, over the course of a year, he changed the culture. And over time, and it was brutal, it was a huge fight to get there, but we started to have a culture that was built on respect. Anyway, the next year we moved back to St. Marcus. The new building had been built. It was supposed to go from 90 kids to 300 over a decade. In the second year, it was full and there was a waiting list. Why? Because we had created an environment that was all about Jesus, that had a high level of discipline, and where kids knew that they were loved. So that was 2004. By 2006, there was about 300 kids on the waiting list, and we decided to double the size of the school. We started a $13.5 million campaign. We were blessed by incredible donors. We were able to build 2 buildings. So there's now 700 children on the main campus. and about 160 on the second campus that opened last year. We just broke ground on a 300-student addition to the North Campus. So by August, our capacity will be just about 1,200 kids. And the reality is that we can't build fast enough. As soon as we build, the building is full, and every summer there's about 300 kids that can't get in. So that's the St. Marcus story. That's sort of where I'm coming from. But what I really want to look at today, I want to dialogue about a little bit, is the condition of Milwaukee, education in Milwaukee, and what the church's role is and what the church is doing. So let me pose a question, and maybe you could just discuss it at your tables for like 2 minutes, okay? Here's the question. What are Milwaukee's 3 biggest problems, and what is the root cause of those problems? Okay? Milwaukee's 3 biggest problems, and what's the root cause? Go for it. Okay, what do we have? Let's just go table by table. Just give us one. What do you guys have?
You're saying crime?
Crime, okay. Clearly, huge problem. Homicide rate, ridiculous. What do you guys have? Poverty? Okay, absolutely. Widespread poverty. Crime, poverty, what else?
Racial tensions.
Okay, racial tension and segregation. Good. Anything else we identified? Brave soul, go ahead, offer up. What are the basic root causes? I know you got some. I saw the shake of the head. Go ahead.
Segregation would be a cause of the other things, possibly.
Okay, why would segregation be a cause?
Because there's already a problem in the area and they're not doing anything about it.
Yeah, and so where the problem is separate. This is fascinating. It's funny to me that you'd mention that because I didn't plan on really talking about segregation. But just listen to an episode of This American Life. Absolutely fascinating story about integration and segregation right next door to Ferguson. I did not know that between Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, when desegregation started, in 1988, when desegregation ended, when they stopped the integration programs, the achievement gap between black and white students dropped every single year, okay? The low point was 1988, at which point they stopped forced desegregation. And between 1988 and today, the achievement gap between black and white students has been growing. So we're actually in a cycle of significant re-segregation. And exactly what was pointed out right there is in fact a huge issue, particularly in our city, because Milwaukee is said to be the most segregated city in the United States, okay? So when we talk about like problems in Milwaukee, here are some realities. We are the most segregated city in the United States. We have some of the lowest achievement test scores for African American low-income students of any city in the United States. And then, did you know that the state of Wisconsin incarcerates more African American men than any other state in the union? We're aware of that? So, like, this is where some of my slides might come in handy, but I'll just show you and maybe you can see it. This is Arnie Duncan, who is just recently spoke. He was the U.S. Secretary of Education. You don't have all these slides because I had too many and I wanted to give it to you on one page. But he called Milwaukee a national disgrace because of our education woes. So we rank last in the overall well-being of black children. We have the biggest racial achievement gap in the nation. We have the biggest black incarceration rate in the nation, and we're the most segregated city. Just think about that for a minute. What, if there isn't forced integration, what is the only viable solution to the segregation in our city?
I'll throw out education.
How so?
The desire to I know it's difficult to even the playing field, but to at least give the students an opportunity to grow out of to grow out of the poverty.
Okay, it's a great point. If we educate kids, in the long run, you may end up with less segregation, right?
But immediately.
But what do we know most often happens to young African Americans from a place like Milwaukee who are educationally successful? What do? Leave. So education is not going to resolve segregation when white people choose to be educated elsewhere, right? So what is the only thing that can possibly resolve segregation in Milwaukee? Come on, we're bright students from 3 great colleges. We've got to have a solution.
Give them a reason to stay.
Give who a reason to stay?
Name Auburn. Name Auburn's the educated.
Okay. Yup. How do you do that? It's a good idea. So I just want to submit to you at the outset that the only answer, did you have an idea?
Why my minor is N and my major is calm. So, like, what the solution is combined and calm. And I think it really starts with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we need help of neighbor and tend to those needs to really make people stay. You need to show them you care about them. And then build on that relationship.
Yes. So, frankly, you went exactly where I'm going, which is it's my conviction that there's only one solution to all of the problems in Milwaukee, and ultimately it's the church. Like it's Christians biting the bullet and following Jesus to where Jesus would be in a meaningful way. Okay, so one of the things that I want to put out there, and I'm all out of order in my talk, and that's fine, because I want this to be a dialogue, and I want you to challenge me, because I very rarely get challenged, because normally it's like a big group. I believe the church, meaning the Christians in our city, are missing a massive opportunity to follow Jesus in a radical kind of way, and in a way that could transform our city. So let's look at a few more things here real quick, just so we can conceptualize this. This is the incarceration rate, okay? At the very bottom line at 6.7% is the national incarceration rate for black men, 6.7%, okay? And then coming up from the bottom are all of the other states, and then you can see the big red line at the top. That is Wisconsin. The national average is 6.7. The number 2 state is Oklahoma at 9.7. We're at 12.8. 12.8% of black men incarcerated. Okay, so this guy right here, that statistic never meant anything to me until Ashanti came along. Ashanti was 2nd grade when I got to St. Marcus. Since I've been there, we've graduated 300. Ashanti is now 20. He's the only incarcerated graduate of the school since I've been there. And he's serving 62 years. So I go and see him about twice a year up in Waupun. And it's totally incredible. Sitting across the table from a 20-year-old who's going to be like in his 70s at best, possibly 80s before he gets out. And yet, we are incarcerating vast numbers of these young men. Here's a shocking statistic, speaking of education. There are 95 80-80 schools in Milwaukee. An 80-80 school is 80% black and 80% low income. Out of those 35,000 kids in those 95 schools, maybe you guys saw it up here, what percentage of those 35,000 kids would you guess can read at grade level? Take a wild guess.
5%?
5%, real close. 7.3. So here in the city, not very far from here, we have 5 schools that have a 0% proficiency rate. Nobody can read at grade level. That's 5 schools. There's 12 more that have less than 2.5% able to read. So if you go to these schools, you understand why right away. You just have to walk in the front door. They are completely crazy. These schools are crazy, right? So the reason why, there's 2 reasons why we're incarcerating so many African Americans. One, because there's this chunk of 35,000 kids that even today are not getting educated. And then we have really tough drug laws, especially in the central city. Okay, let's take a little segue here real quick. Can I ask you to, at your tables, identify 5 characteristics of Christ? Just get with somebody, 5 top characteristics. Who was he? How would you describe him? Okay, what do we have? Time is up. Go ahead, yell them out.
Faith, love,
Just wait, just one at a time. Give me your first one.
faith,
Okay, so faithful, good. Then I heard loving. So if you had faithful, raise your hand. Anybody? Yeah, loving? Yeah, real common. What else? Humble. Raise your hand if you had humble. Okay, good. What else? Patient. Raise your hand if you have patient. Okay, nice. What else?
Goes with loving but compassionate.
Compassionate.
Talks it all
Hugely
the time.
compassionate. Yeah. Okay, any others?
He loved everyone, didn't make any difference.
Okay, so he was magnanimous in his love, right? Okay. Anything else? Any other critical components of who Christ was? Yep, God.
He's a teacher.
Teacher. Okay, so let me read you some Bible verses and tell me what word you would attach to it. When Jesus said, love your enemies. Could say loving, I get that. But what other word could you use to describe Jesus when he says, love your enemies? Radical. Isn't that pretty radical? Who was the last enemy you had? Let alone loved. Okay? How about this one? If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily. What word would you attach to that? Like, think about self-denial. Your own personal practice of self-denial. Like, I don't mean like don't eat the donut or have another slice of pizza. I mean like real self-denial. What word would you, when it says you must deny yourself and take up your cross, what word might we attach to that? Sacrificial. Humble.
Selfless.
Selfless.
Crazy.
Crazy. You know what? I think that's radical, especially here in America. The idea of self-denial, when you really think about that. Here's another one. If anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last, the servant of all. Humble. Isn't that a radical statement? I challenge you to think about the last time you raced to really be last. To be the bottom person. How about this one? Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body. Don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or your body, what you will wear. Is that a radical statement? I think it's ridiculously radical. Here you go. Blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you and insult you.